New York, 8 years ago, was a city that glittered with ambition, but devoured the weak without hesitation, and Amani Johnson always felt like she was walking on the razor's edge between those two realities. At 22, she had clawed her way from a childhood of cramped apartments, late-night bus rides, and a mother working 3 jobs to a full scholarship at Columbia's medical school, an achievement she wore like a shield against a world that kept telling girls like her that they didn't belong. But nothing had ever made her feel more seen or more loved than Evan Blackwell, except she didn't meet him as Evan. She met him as Vince, a man who hid his wealth behind second-hand jeans, quiet smiles, and the kind of gentleness that made her forget the world was cruel. Vince had a way of holding her like he was memorizing the shape of her sadness. He would slide his arms around her from behind when she was studying in their tiny off-campus apartment, press his face into the crook of her neck and whisper, "You're the only place in this world where I can breathe." She believed him. She felt him. She trusted him. And so when she discovered she was pregnant with twins no less, she cried in his arms, not out of fear, but out of a happiness so fragile she held her breath in case life stole it away. Vince. Evan had been terrified at first, pacing the apartment, like a man wrestling the universe itself. But when he finally knelt in front of her, eyes glossy and voice trembling, and said, "Marry me, Amani. I don't care about anything except you and our children," she believed that love could be enough. But love had never met the Blackwell family. The moment Richard Blackwell discovered the pregnancy, the quiet world Amani built cracked open into a darkness she didn't yet understand. Richard wasn't just powerful. He was the kind of powerful that bent laws and men and systems until they broke under his will. For a man like him, Amani was not a woman. She was a threat, an inconvenience, a stain on the pristine legacy of a billion-dollar empire. "My son does not chain himself to a girl plucked from the gutter," he told her the only time she ever met him, his eyes cold and precise like surgical blades. "And a Blackwell heir is not born to a womb like yours." Vince didn't know his father confronted her. He didn't know his father had followed him, learned the truth, and begun to stitch a plan so monstrous it swallowed every good thing Amani knew. Evan Vince meant to tell her his real name, his family, everything. He planned to take her home to stand against his father. He just wanted one more night with her, a quiet night before he faced the hurricane. But fate rarely waits for confessions. The night Amani went into labor, the storm finally arrived. It began with a strange shift in the hospital staff. Nurses she recognized disappeared. Unfamiliar faces replaced them. The obstetrician who had followed her pregnancy was suddenly called away. The lights in the hallway flickered once, twice, like the hospital itself was shuddering. She didn't think too much of it. Labor pain drowned out logic. But when they wheeled her into the operating room, and she saw Richard Blackwell standing behind the glass partition above, flanked by men who looked more like security agents than hospital administrators, something in her blood turned cold. Panic spread through her body faster than the contractions. "Where's Vince?" she whispered, barely able to breathe. No one answered. One nurse squeezed her wrist gently, as if apologizing for something she couldn't control, and that fear, raw, animalistic, crashed into Amani's lungs so hard she choked. She tried to push herself off the table, tried to pull away from the masked staff closing in around her, but hands held her down. "Please, please don't. Someone call him. Call Vince. Call Evan. Call..." Her voice broke as the anesthesiologist approached with a syringe already filled. "This isn't the dose we discussed." Amani gasped, her voice thin under the weight of terror. "Stop. I'm awake. I'm conscious. Stop." "It'll be over soon," someone murmured. It wasn't a comfort. It was a promise. The needle slid into her arm. The world dimmed. Voices blended into a cold hum. Above her, through the thickening haze, She saw Richard's silhouette behind the glass. His voice filtered down like a judge delivering a sentence. Terminate one. Extract the other. Her involvement ends tonight. Amani screamed, but the drug stole the sound. She tried to fight to claw her way back to consciousness, but the darkness swallowed her, pulling her into a void where time didn't exist. She didn't know that Evan, frantic and wild-eyed, had arrived at the hospital moments too late. He had tried to reach the operating room, but one of the elevators malfunctioned, deliberately trapping him between floors. He beat on the doors with bleeding hands until he forced them open and climbed up the shaft. He ran through the corridors, ignoring security shouting behind him. He reached the operating room just as alarms blared. Smoke poured from a small fire, sparked by faulty wires. Whether failure or sabotage, no one would ever know. Evan burst inside through the emergency entrance, coughing eyes stinging from smoke, shouting Amani's name like the world was ending. And then the ceiling frame loosened by the same malfunction that caused the fire crashed down. A metal beam struck him in the head. Blood pooled instantly. His body collapsed beside hers. For a brief second, just a breath, Amani's eyelids fluttered. Through the drug and haze and flames, she saw him. Her Vince. Her Evan, lying motionless, blood trailing down his temple. She reached out with shaking fingers, but her hand fell limp before it touched him. Everything went silent. When she woke hours later, the world had already been rewritten. A nurse with trembling hands handed her one baby, only one. Where is the other twin? Amani whispered, her voice fragile, afraid, already knowing the answer would drown her. There was a complication, the nurse said, eyes avoiding hers. I'm so sorry. No, Amani breathed. No, he was alive. I heard both. I felt both. Where is my baby? No one answered her cries. Evan never came. When she demanded to see him, security told her there was no record of any man with that name visiting her. When she begged for medical charts, images, fetal monitoring records, everything had either been misplaced or corrupted. The hospital's database showed only one baby, only one heartbeat, only one file, as if the other twin had never existed, as if her love had never existed, as if she had imagined the man who called her his home. And that was the moment something inside her cracked, not loudly, not violently, but with a quiet, devastating finality. She gathered the only child left to her, a tiny boy with a full head of dark curls and a cry that trembled like hers, and she named him Nathan, meaning he who is given, because she refused to believe the universe had taken everything away from her. She didn't know that Evan, alive, but cognitively fractured, had been moved to a private facility under the name Evan Blackwell. She didn't know that the man she loved had awoken with a bandaged head and a hollowed memory where every moment with her had been carved out. And she didn't know that Richard Blackwell stood over his son's hospital bed and whispered, "You will forget her. You will move on." Amani left New York at dawn 2 days later, wrapped in a hospital gown and a coat someone had left behind in the hallway. Nathan slept against her chest, tiny breath, warm against her collarbone. She didn't look back. She couldn't. The city that once held her dreams had turned into a place where her child could be stolen. Her love erased, her life rewritten. As she boarded the early bus, heading west, the skyline of Manhattan disappeared behind her, swallowed by fog. She held Nathan closer, kissed the top of his small head, and whispered, voice trembling, "I will never let anyone take you again." And thus, she carried her son away from New York, from the Blackwell empire, and from the ashes of a love she believed had died that night, along with the twin whose heartbeat still echoed in her dreams. She didn't know fate was already preparing the day when all that blood, all those lies, and all the darkness she escaped would return, not to destroy her, but to unravel the truth she had been forced to bury. Los Angeles International Airport at noon was a living beast of noise and motion, shuffling crowds, rolling suitcases, overlapping announcements, and a restless hum that seeped into the bones. To most, it was just chaos. To Amani Johnson, stepping into its brightness felt like stepping into the open jaws of destiny. 8 years of running from New York, from the Blackwell shadow, from the ghost of the man she once loved, had led her here. And now, she was going back. Not to reclaim what she lost. She no longer believed anything could be reclaimed, but to find her mother who had vanished like a whisper swallowed by the wind. Every instinct she'd honed since the night of the birth, every survival technique sharpened by fear, told her that returning to New York meant stepping into danger. But she had no choice. Blood calls to blood, and family is the one truth Amani still believed in. She held Nathan's hand tightly as they moved through the packed terminal, her grip firm, protective, maybe a little too tight, because Nathan looked up at her with his wide, thoughtful brown eyes and squeezed back, as if telling her, "I'm here, Mom. I'm okay." He was 8 now, bright, brave, and too perceptive for his age. She had never been able to hide her fear from him. He always sensed when her heart raced, when her breath hitched, when memories clawed at her throat. Today was worse. Today her heart felt like it was walking ahead of her, dragging her into something she wasn't ready to face. Across the airport, Evan Blackwell strode through the VIP entrance with the kind of detached authority that came naturally to a man who'd forgotten softer versions of himself. As CEO of Blackwell Biotech, he carried an aura of cold precision, sharp suit, sharper gaze, and the quiet arrogance of someone accustomed to bending the world rather than navigating it. He had been summoned to Los Angeles for an emergency shareholders meeting, though his migraines had been worsening and his patience thinning. Stress never bothered him. Emptiness did. A strange emptiness he could never explain. "Your car is waiting, Mr. Blackwell," his assistant murmured behind him, but he barely heard. Something tugged at him, a faint pull beneath his ribs, inexplicable and unwelcome. He pressed his fingers briefly to his temple. The migraines usually came with flashes, shadows of faces he didn't recognize, the scent of lavender soap, someone laughing softly in the dark, a feeling of warmth he never actually remembered living. He brushed it off. He always did. But fate doesn't care for amnesia. It simply waits for the right collision. The collision came in the form of a sudden announcement blaring over the speakers, startling a cluster of travelers around them. And in the ripple of confusion, Amani felt Nathan's hand slip from hers. She turned sharply, fear spiking through her like ice. "Nathan." Her voice drowned in the noise. Panic rose, but she forced herself to move, scanning the crowd, heart thundering. Nathan, small and swallowed by the forest of legs and bodies, found himself swept away by the shifting tide of passengers. His pulse hammered as he called out for his mother, but the sound vanished into the airport's roar. Breathless and frightened, he darted forward, desperate for a familiar face, any anchor in the chaos. And then he collided with someone. Strong hands steadied him. A tall man, broad shoulders, dark brown hair, cold blue eyes. Nathan looked up and froze. Evan looked down, and the world tilted. The boy's face was a shock to the system. Dainty nose, round cheeks, skin the warm shade of honeyed bronze, and eyes that seemed to glow under the harsh airport lighting. Eyes that mirrored his own. No, not mirrored. Reflected, echoed, completed. Evan's breath caught in his throat, his chest tightening in a way that felt both alien and disturbingly familiar. The migraine's tug sharpened, then dissolved into a something softer, deeper, almost aching. "Hey," he managed, voice lower than intended, steadying the boy with gentle hands. "Are you okay?" Nathan's fear melted at the calmness in the man's tone. He nodded automatically, though his eyes remained fixed on the stranger's face, studying him with an intensity that made Evan's pulse flicker. For a moment, time stilled around them, and the airport's noise faded into a dull hum. It was as if the universe itself paused to observe the impossible symmetry between man and child. Then, another child's voice pierced the moment. Nathan. A boy with sandy hair and pale skin pushed through the crowd. Theo Blackwell, guarded and shy, but unmistakably privileged in the way he carried himself, dressed in high-end clothes that didn't quite hide his loneliness. He stopped short when he saw Nathan. His small mouth parted. Confusion flickered into awe. They stared at each other. Two 8-year-old boys, standing inches apart, breathing the same air, sharing the same startled heartbeat. Evan looked from Theo to Nathan and felt dizziness crawl beneath his skin. They were identical in a way no coincidence could justify. Same height, same jawline, same curl pattern in their hair if you looked closely. The only difference was skin tone, adding contrast to a mirror image. Theo. Evan breathed, though his voice felt foreign. Theo stepped closer to Nathan, like he was approaching a long-lost memory. Nathan mirrored him unconsciously. And then, in perfect unison, both boys whispered, "Why do you look like me?" The question sliced something open in Evan's chest. Before he could respond, a voice, one he had never heard, but that crashed over him like a tidal wave of déjà vu, rang out in raw panic. Nathan. Amani emerged from the crowd, breathless, eyes wide, her curls disheveled from the frantic search. She ran straight to Nathan, dropping to her knees as she pulled him into her arms, with a desperate force, as if afraid he might slip away again. Evan stood frozen. His heartbeat faltered. His vision blurred around the edges, because the moment he saw her, every nerve in his body screamed with recognition. But not the logical kind. Not memory. This was deeper, primal, like something forgotten had just slammed into place. The air thickened between them when she finally looked up. Amani's gaze collided with Evan's. Shock flared first, then a confusion so intense it shivered through her. She had never seen his face under fluorescent lights, in a suit with the sharp edges of wealth and power, shaping him into another man entirely. She had only known him as Vince, warm, messy-haired, with a smile that always tasted a little like rebellion. But the eyes, God, the eyes were the same. Blue, like fractured glass. Beautiful. Devastating. Eyes she had dreamt of even when she tried to forget. Evan felt the ground slip dangerously beneath him. Her face was a haunting, soft, dark curls, framing warm, golden-brown skin. Lips trembling with leftover panic, eyes, deep and familiar in a way that punched straight through the walls he'd spent 8 years fortifying. "Are you—" he began, but his voice cracked, unexpectedly unsteady. Amani's breath stumbled. She tightened her hold on Nathan, as if grounding herself. Her heart hammered in her chest so violently she thought he might hear it. She knew those eyes. Even if she tried to convince herself otherwise, even if the man before her looked nothing like the Vince she loved, some part of her soul recognized him instantly, the way you recognize a melody after years apart. But she couldn't allow herself to believe it. Love had betrayed her before. Hope had nearly killed her. And yet her throat tightened painfully. "I'm sorry," she forced out, attempting composure. "My son got lost in the crowd. Thank you for helping him." Evan didn't move, didn't blink. He couldn't. Something pulsed in him. An echo of a memory. A phantom touch. Lavender soap. Warm skin under his palms. Laughter as soft as summer rain. Flashes of a woman in dim candlelight. Was it her? No, it couldn't be. He didn't remember her. He didn't remember any woman. But his body did. His soul did. His heart, traitorous, aching, did. Nathan clung to Amani, but his gaze kept darting to Theo. Theo did the same. The magnetic pull between them was undeniable. A connection neither boy understood, but both felt instinctively deeply. And that was when the second collision happened, not physical, but emotional, when Amani finally looked at Theo. Her breath hitched. She didn't know his name, didn't know his life, but she knew that face. She had held that face once in a hospital room drenched in smoke and terror. She had screamed for that face. "Mom," Nathan whispered, sensing the shift in her breathing. Amani swallowed hard, struggling to brace herself. Her pulse thundered. Theo shifted nervously behind Evan's leg and said softly, "Dad, Dad." The word detonated in Amani's chest. Evan's jaw tightened. He noticed the way Amani tensed, the way her eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Something in her reaction rattled him. Suspicion curled low in his gut, unexpected, unwelcome, overpowering. "You two," Evan said slowly, voice rough, pointed gaze, flicking between Amani, Nathan, and Theo, "know each other." The question felt dangerous, like a match poised above gasoline. Amani bit down on the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted blood. "No," she lied, her tone steady, but her eyes betraying a flicker of fear. "We've never met." Evan didn't believe her. He didn't know why. He didn't know anything. But some instinct deep inside him, a place untouched by logic, memory, or time, whispered, "She's lying, and she has every reason to." A moment stretched between them, taut and trembling, charged with something neither of them could name. And in that suspended heartbeat, both felt it, an undeniable truth, a gravitational force pulling them toward a past that refused to stay buried. Amani was the first to break the stare. She rose, pulling Nathan closer, as if shielding him from something she couldn't yet face. "We should go," she murmured. But as she turned, Nathan looked back at Evan, at Theo, confusion and longing swirling in his eyes. Evan's chest tightened. Something important was slipping away, and he had no idea why it mattered so much. "Wait," he said, suddenly stepping forward. Amani froze. Nathan tightened his hold on her hand. Theo watched with wide eyes. Evan's voice softened, nearly breaking against his will. "Who are you?" Amani exhaled shakily, her heart cracking open just enough for fear and longing to bleed through. She looked over her shoulder, her voice barely above a whisper, trembling with truth. She couldn't speak. "Someone you forgot." The days following the airport incident unfolded with a tension neither boy could articulate, but both felt lodged beneath their ribs like a secret trying to breathe. Nathan couldn't stop thinking about the pale boy who shared his face, nor could Theo forget the warm-skinned mirror image who looked like he belonged in a life far different from the one Richard Blackwell had crafted around him. They didn't understand the politics of bloodlines or the weight of a billionaire's empire, nor did they grasp the cruelty woven into the adults circling their lives. But children sense truth in ways grown-ups forget. They knew something was wrong. They knew something was missing. And worst of all, they knew something had been stolen. Nathan lay awake that night in the tiny Airbnb Amani had rented in LA, staring at the faint patterns of headlights drifting across the ceiling, unable to silence the questions swirling in his mind. His mother slept fitfully, turning every so often, whispering things she never meant him to hear. Please, apologies, fragments of nightmares that carried more pain than he understood. He reached over and brushed a curl away from her forehead, his chest tightening. He didn't know why meeting that other boy made his stomach twist, but it did. It felt like remembering something he'd never lived. Meanwhile, miles away in the polished loneliness of a penthouse suite overlooking the city, Theo sat curled on the window seat, hugging his knees, staring at the lights reflecting off the skyscrapers. His caretaker had tried to coax him into bed, but he refused. He felt different tonight, shaken, unsettled, like someone had peeled back a layer of the world and shown him a glimpse of something precious he was never supposed to see. For 8 years, all he'd had was his father's distant affection and his grandfather's manipulative shadow. No mother, not even a picture. The one time he asked, Richard told him she died during childbirth, and Evan, confused and emotionally detached, never corrected the lie. Theo had never questioned it. Until now. Until he looked into a pair of eyes, identical to his own eyes, filled with love he'd never felt, with warmth he'd never known. Eyes that made him realize he had been missing something all along. And so when morning came, the boys acted on instinct rather than reason. They arranged to meet. Theo slipped away from his caretaker at the hotel lobby, using a trick he'd practiced for years, walking confidently toward the elevators until an adult assumed he belonged somewhere. Nathan waited outside by the fountain across the street, heart thudding, palms sweaty. They approached each other awkwardly, as if drawn by an invisible thread pulling them into place. Nathan was the first to speak, his voice small. "So, you came." "I had to," Theo answered, glancing around nervously. "I couldn't stop thinking about it." Neither boy knew where to start, so they simply stared again, taking in the impossible likeness. Same cheekbones, same curl pattern, even the same tiny scar under the right eyebrow, except one scar was paler on Theo, deeper on Nathan. "You really look like me," Nathan said, his brows furrowing. Exactly like me." Theo bit his lip. "Do you think—" Nathan's voice cracked slightly. "Do you think we could be brothers?" Theo hesitated, eyes bright with something between hope and fear. "Maybe. But maybe isn't enough." Nathan swallowed. "Then how do we know for sure?" For a moment they both stood there, breathing the same crisp morning air, sharing the same tremble in their chests. Theo lifted his head slowly. "DNA." Nathan blinked. "Huh. A DNA test," Theo repeated with an odd steadiness for an 8-year-old. "It's what Dad uses when he works on cases or when he needs to be sure about stuff. Science doesn't lie." Nathan stared, absorbing the seriousness of the suggestion. "You mean, go to a lab like a real one?" "Yes," Theo nodded. "We just need samples, hairworks." The idea was terrifying and thrilling all at once. Nathan's stomach twisted, but he nodded. Deep down, he already knew. But knowing and proving were different things, and something in him needed the truth written in a way no adult could erase. With nervous determination, they set their plan into motion. Sneaking hair wasn't as difficult as they imagined. Children are invisible in ways adults rarely notice. Nathan plucked a strand from Amani's brush that morning, feeling a pang of guilt as he tucked it into a tiny zip-top bag. Theo waited until Evan was distracted on a business call and pretended to hug him, something he'd never done before, just to pluck a loose strand of dark brown hair from the collar of his father's suit. The moment he held the hair in his hand, something in him tightened painfully. He didn't know why. Maybe because he wanted a different hug, one from a mother he'd never met. Maybe because the world suddenly felt too big, too cruel, too full of secrets. They met again near the same fountain, clutching their stolen samples like forbidden treasures. "I know a place," Theo whispered, surprising even himself. "Grandfather used them once. It's private, discreet, no questions." Nathan nodded, though the word grandfather made his stomach twist. They took a bus. Theo, for the first time in his life, Nathan guiding him with the confidence of someone who had grown up making life work with limited means. By the time they reached the quiet medical building tucked between a laundromat and a Korean grocery store, they felt like conspirators in a world too big to understand. The The receptionist barely glanced at them. Money talks louder than age, and Theo had slipped a Blackwell credit card into his jacket pocket. They were escorted to a testing room, sterile and cold, the fluorescent lights' hums buzzing softly above them. Nathan's hands trembled as he placed the samples on the table. Theo touched his shoulder gently. "It's okay," he whispered. "We're doing the right thing." Nathan's throat tightened. "What if we find out something bad?" Theo looked at him, eyes soft but firm. "The truth can't be worse than not knowing." The technician processed the samples. The boys sat in silence, their feet dangling off the exam table, hearts beating in nervous sync. Seconds stretched into minutes. Minutes felt like hours. When the lab director finally walked in, holding a sealed envelope, both boys held their breath. He placed it between them. "Results are inside. You'll need an adult. Thank you." Theo interrupted, voice sharper than usual. The director hesitated but left. Nathan stared at the envelope like it might explode. Theo swallowed hard. "You open it." Nathan shook his head. "No, you." Theo's small fingers trembled as he tore the seal. A sheet of paper slid out crisp and white, filled with numbers. Neither boy understood, but the conclusion was written clearly at the bottom. Probability of biological full-sibling relation, 99.998%. For a long moment, neither of them breathed. The world seemed to narrow into a single point, the truth they had chased now staring back at them in ink and finality. Nathan's eyes filled first, welling silently until tears spilled down his cheeks. "So, we are brothers," he whispered, voice cracking. Theo nodded slowly, his stomach twisting, lips trembling as he tried to absorb words that felt too big. "Twins," he said softly. "It says identical twins." Nathan covered his face with shaking hands, a sob escaping before he could stop it. Theo reached for him instinctively, and Nathan clung to him, their thin arms wrapped around each other, with the desperation of boys who had lived for 8 years without knowing something essential was missing. Theo's voice broke as he rested his forehead against his brother's shoulder. I thought I didn't have a mother because she didn't want me." Nathan shook his head fiercely through tears. "No, Mom didn't know. She thought you were gone. She cried for you, Theo. I heard her at night sometimes. She never forgot you." Theo's sobs deepened, not loud but raw, aching in a way that stabbed straight into Nathan's chest. "I don't remember her," he whispered. "I want to, but I don't." Nathan inhaled shakily, wiping his cheeks. "That's okay. She'll remember you enough for both of us." Theo nodded, but fear crept into his voice. "What about Dad?" He didn't know either. "Right." Nathan hesitated. He didn't know the truth, but he sensed danger in the man's absence at the hospital years ago. Sensed the sharp edges of something hidden behind their parents' silence. I'm not sure," he admitted softly. Theo closed his eyes, pressing a hand to his chest. "If he didn't know, I can forgive him. But if he did," Nathan squeezed Theo's hand. "We'll figure it out together." The door opened suddenly. Both boys jumped. A nurse poked her head in confusion, clouding her face. "You boys shouldn't be in here. Where are your parents?" Panic flickered across their faces. Then Theo grabbed Nathan's hand, eyes burning with sudden determination. "Come on," he whispered urgently. "We have to get out of here before anyone tells our parents we were here." They bolted past the nurse, darting through the hallway with adrenaline pumping through their small limbs. By the time adults gave chase, the boys were already outside, racing toward the nearest bus stop, clutching each other's hands like lifelines. On the bus ride back, the envelope sat folded in Nathan's pocket, warm from their shared grip. Neither spoke, both lost in the weight of their discovery, and the storm they understood was coming. They didn't know how their parents would react. They didn't know the depth of the secrets buried beneath the Blackwell empire, or how violently those secrets would fight to stay hidden. But they knew this: they had found each other, and nothing and no one was going to tear them apart again. Not family, not lies, not even destiny. The emergency department smelled faintly of antiseptic and rain-soaked asphalt, the kind of night where thunder pressed low against the sky and the hospital lights flickered like they were bracing for a storm. Amani had picked up extra shifts without telling Nathan, claiming she needed the money. But the truth was more complicated. She needed movement, distraction, something to keep her from replaying the encounter at the airport. Evan's eyes locking onto hers, like a spotlight slicing through 8 years of darkness. The boys staring at each other like two halves of a mirror the world had tried to break. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the shock on Evan's face, felt the echo of the man she once loved trembling beneath the mask he now wore. She scrubbed her hands, pushed stray curls behind her ears, and forced herself to breathe. She was here to work. She was here to live. She was here to forget. But forgetting never lasts more than a heartbeat when fate has already decided otherwise. The paramedics burst through the sliding doors, with a gurney wheels squealing on the linoleum. Adult male, early 30s, severe migraine, possible neurological complications. BP, irregular, unresponsive for brief intervals, one called out. Amani moved toward them, automatically, clipboard ready. But then she saw him. Evan, pale eyes, half-lidded jaw clenched so tightly she could see the tension straining beneath his skin. His tie was gone, shirt collar open, as though he had ripped at it in a moment of agony. His fingers dug into the edge of the gurney, as if holding on to consciousness itself. Her breath caught. The world did its familiar trick, the one that only happened around him, tilting slightly, narrowing to a tunnel where only his face existed. She approached on trained footsteps, but her heart was sprinting in her chest, frantic and confused. She told herself it was coincidence, that fate wasn't cruel enough to bring him back into her hands like this. But when she touched his forehead to check for fever, the moment her palm brushed his skin, everything shattered. Evan's body jolted a violent tremor that ripped through him, eyes snapping open with a sharp inhale. Not from pain, from recognition. An old buried recognition. A scent he remembered without knowing why. Lavender warmth. Something soft and familiar that lingered on her skin. His breath came ragged, and he reached up instinctively, fingers wrapping around her wrist with a gentleness that contradicted his disorientation. The room seemed to fade around them. Machines hummed in the distance. Doctors called out orders, but neither of them heard. His gaze fixed on hers with an intensity that pinned her to the spot. "You," he whispered, voice raw, hoarse from the pain clawing inside his skull. She tried to step back, tried to pull her hand away, but his grip tightened. Not desperate, not forceful, just pleading, as if his body feared she might vanish if he let go. "Evan." She managed her voice steady, only on the surface. Her heart, however, was a wildfire. "You're having a severe migraine. We need to." But he cut across her softly, his eyelids fluttering, with the effort of focusing on her face. Amani. The way he said her name like a forgotten prayer nearly buckled her knees. It wasn't just recognition. It was longing. It was something deep, something carved into the places memory had failed to reach. She froze completely. There was no reason for him to know her. No reason for him to speak her name. No reason for the man who had forgotten everything to look at her with eyes that seemed to remember her soul. Panic rose in her throat. Panic and something dangerously close to hope. And hope was the most treacherous of all. "Mr. Blackwell," she said quickly, forcing professionalism into her voice. Please lie back. You're in the hospital. You're safe. But Evan wasn't listening. His fingers slid from her wrist to her palm, holding it as if anchoring himself. Why do I know you? He murmured, voice thick with confusion. Why do I feel like… He grimaced, clutching his head with his free hand. Like I've been looking for you. Amani's heart stuttered. Pain stabbed through her chest, because she knew how badly she had once wanted him to look for her. But that dream died the night she gave birth alone. She pulled her hand back gently but firmly. Please. She whispered the word, trembling with suppressed emotion. Let me help you medically. Evan's hand fell away slowly, his fingers curling into the sheet at his side, as if resisting the loss of her touch. He let the staff move him, let the machines rise around him, but his gaze never left her. He watched her, with the raw, unblinking focus of a man trying to decode a memory trapped deep beneath the surface of his mind. She pretended not to feel it, but each time their eyes met, something in her cracked a little more. Hours passed. Tests were run. IV fluids dripped. Evan's pain stabilized, but Amani felt the storm brewing inside him and inside herself long before the skies outside opened with rain. By the time her shift ended, midnight had fallen like a heavy curtain. She slipped out of the hospital, hugging her thin jacket around her shoulders. The rain was relentless, cold needles pricking her skin as she hurried toward the street. She didn't hear footsteps approaching until a voice broke through the downpour. Amani. She turned sharply. Evan stood under the small awning near the entrance, soaked to the bone, dress shirt plastered against his skin, hair dripping, chest rising and falling in uneven breaths. He looked like he'd run through the storm to reach her. He probably had. Her pulse kicked hard. What are you doing? You should be resting. He shook his head, water scattering from his hair. I can't rest. Not until I understand. She took a step back, but he stepped forward, keeping the distance constant, as if drawn by some magnetic pull neither of them could fight. I don't understand why, he said, voice low, but steady. But when I look at you, something inside me reacts like I've lost something. Something important. Amani's throat tightened. You're confused. The migraine, no. His interruption was soft but absolute. This is not confusion. And it's not pain. He hesitated, studying her face with a tenderness she didn't dare acknowledge. It feels like remembering. A tremor shook her. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the sharp angles of his face, the same face she once traced with her fingertips in the quiet dark of youth. Evan, she whispered, barely able to hold his gaze. Please don't do this. Do what he breathed, stepping closer, his voice almost a plea. Feel something I can't explain. Want to understand why my heart reacts when you're near. You can't. Her voice fractured. You shouldn't. I can't help it. His hand lifted slowly, as if afraid she might flinch, and he brushed the back of his fingers against her cheek. Rainwater glistened on her skin, blending with the warmth of his touch. She stiffened breath, catching her resolve shattering in the face of a gesture so familiar, it almost hurt. His thumb traced her cheekbone gently. Does this feel wrong to you? He asked quietly. She wanted to say yes. She wanted to say he should stay away. She wanted to pretend 8 years of grief hadn't just ruptured open inside her chest. But her body betrayed her. Her eyes fluttered shut for half a second too long. His breath hitched. He leaned in, unable to stop himself, their faces inches apart. The rain softened around them, or maybe the world simply faded again, leaving only the sound of their uneven breaths. Amani. He whispered, his forehead almost touching hers. Tell me to go, and I will. But don't lie. Don't tell me you don't feel this too. Her eyes opened slowly, meeting his with a rawness she couldn't hide. I can't do this, she whispered, though the tremble in her voice betrayed the truth. He reached for her hand, intertwining their fingers with a familiarity that made her heart lurch. Please, he murmured, voice cracking with something painfully honest. Don't walk away. Not again. Again. The word was a knife. A memory not his, but theirs. A flash of that night smoke and screams, his body collapsing beside hers. She grabbed her hand back, heart hammering wildly. You don't know what you're asking, she said, voice trembling. You don't know me. Then let me, he answered softly. Let me try. Rain drummed harder. Lightning illuminated their silhouettes. Two souls still chained to a past. Only one of them remembered, yet both still felt. For the first time in 8 years, Amani felt something shift. Hope, fear, love, and loss colliding in her chest so forcefully she could barely breathe. A crack appeared, small, trembling, but undeniable, in the wall she had built around her heart. Evan saw it, felt it, and in the space of a single heartbeat, he whispered the words that undid her completely. Amani, I don't know why, but being near you feels like coming home. The next morning arrived heavy with the smell of rain-soaked asphalt and the echo of words Amani couldn't push out of her head. Being near you feels like coming home. She told herself she wouldn't think about Evan anymore. She told herself she would focus on Nathan, her mother, the danger creeping around them. But her heart refused to obey the logic her mind clung to. Every time she blinked, she saw him standing in the storm water streaming down his face, as if the night itself had been grieving with him. Every time she breathed, she felt the ghost of his touch against her cheek. She didn't want him. She didn't want the universe to be cruel enough to bring him back into her orbit, only to tear him away again. But fate rarely cared for the wants of broken people. She was halfway through her morning coffee when her phone buzzed with a number she didn't recognize. Her breath caught before she even answered, something in her bones tightening, warning her. Hello, she said carefully. Silence. Then a voice, shaky, hushed, terrified. Amani's heart dropped. It was an old family friend, Mrs. Carter, who had worked as a nurse in Manhattan for years. She hadn't spoken to the woman since she fled New York. Mrs. Carter. What's wrong? She heard breathing quick, frantic, like someone hiding and too afraid to speak loudly. Honey, listen to me. I shouldn't be calling. Static crackled through the line. They found your mother. She's alive, but God help me, she's not safe. Amani froze, the world narrowing down to a single pulsing point of fear. Where is she? Her voice cracked with urgency she couldn't disguise. Blackwell Biotech, the underground labs. They're forcing her to finish something. Something big, something illegal, and no one who goes down there ever comes out. Amani's breath hitched. Her coffee cup fell shattering unnoticed. Why are you telling me this now? Mrs. Carter's voice trembled. Because Richard Blackwell was here last night talking about you. He knows you're close. He knows Evan found you. Amani's pulse began to roar in her ears. He said, the woman continued, that everything must be contained before the board meets next month. And when he said contained, he meant eliminated. Amani's knees gave out. She slid into the nearest chair. Mrs. Carter began to cry. I'm so sorry, baby. Please don't come back. If you do, he'll kill you too. The line went dead. For a moment, all Amani could hear was the sound of her own heartbeat, wild, terrified, furious. Her mother was alive. Alive. And imprisoned because of the same man who stole her newborn son 8 years ago. Her fingers shook as she covered her mouth, trying to quiet the sob tearing its way up her throat. She didn't realize she was crying until Nathan appeared at her side, wiping her cheek with the sleeve of his sweatshirt. "Mom," he whispered. She pulled him into her arms, burying her face in his hair. "It's okay," she lied, voice breaking. "Everything is going to be okay." But she knew she was about to walk into the lion's den, and this time, the lion wanted blood. Across the city in a penthouse high above L.A., Richard Blackwell stood with his hands clasped behind his back, watching security footage Theo never knew existed. Footage of the boys running through the lab. Footage of them handing over hair samples. Footage of the envelope with the DNA results. His expression didn't shift, but something darkened in his eyes. "Unacceptable," he murmured. "Completely unacceptable." Behind him, 2 security men waited expressionless, trained to obey. "Bring the boy," Richard ordered, "and send a message to Ms. Johnson." The implication was clear. A threat wrapped in silence. Theo was taken swiftly, quietly. No screaming, no struggle. He was lured with the lie that his father needed him. By the time Evan realized his son was missing, only minutes had passed, but it was already too late. The house was in chaos. Security scrambled, doors slammed. Evan stormed through the rooms with a ferocity that electrified the air, calling Theo's name with a desperation that split him open. "Where is my son?" he roared at the guards, voice shaking with something between terror and fury. "Who authorized this?" No one spoke. No one dared. And then Evan saw the security footage. His father's men escorting Theo into a black car, his father waiting inside. The blood drained from Evan's face. Something ancient and violent flared inside him. Rage, betrayal, memory flashing like lightning behind the fog that had clouded his mind for 8 years. He clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. "He took my son," he whispered, disbelief curdling into hatred. "He took my child." His assistant approached cautiously. "Sir, what do you want us to—" "Get the car!" Evan's snapped voice low and lethal. "Now." But before he left, he froze. A name filled his mind, uninvited, unstoppable. Amani. The only person who made the fog lift. The only person whose touch made his memories stir. The only person whose eyes made him feel like he was standing on the edge of something vital. And Richard had taken Theo because of her. Because she was close. Because she knew too much. Suddenly the puzzle sharpened into clarity. The twin boys. The pain in his chest. The flashes of lavender and warmth. The hollow ache he'd carried for 8 years. He didn't have the full picture yet, but he had enough. Enough to know that Amani was at the center of everything his father wanted to hide. Enough to know that she was the woman he had failed once. Enough to know he would not fail her again. He found her at her Airbnb packing frantically, eyes red, shoulders trembling. He didn't knock. He simply entered, breathing hard from the sprint up the stairs. When she saw him, she froze, the guilt and fear in her expression slicing straight through him. "Amani," he breathed, stepping toward her. She backed away, shaking her head. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," he said, voice hoarse, "but I had to come." She swallowed tears clinging to her lashes. "Evan, something's happened. My mother." "I know," he cut in, surprising them both with how much certainty weighed on the words. "My father took Theo." Her breath left her body in a single shudder. "What he's trying to force you back to him, to force your hand. He knows the boys met. He knows something is unraveling, and he's desperate, dangerous." Evan reached for her hands, and this time she didn't pull away. He held her like someone steadying a heart that had been running for too long. "Amani," he murmured, emotion thickening his voice. "Listen to me. I don't have all my memories. I don't know why I reacted the way I did when I first saw you. I don't know why I know your name, or why touching you feels like remembering something that mattered." His voice cracked. But I know this. My father has already taken enough from me. Enough from you. And I will not let him take anything more. Her lips trembled. Evan. His hands framed her face with a reverence that stole her breath. I want to protect you, he whispered fiercely. Even if it means standing against my own blood. Even if it means burning everything he built. Even if it means facing whatever truth I've forgotten. She felt her heart splitting open under the weight of his words. 8 years of love buried under grief suddenly clawed their way to the surface. Evan, she whispered shakily, you don't remember. You don't know what we were, what we lost. Then tell me, he breathed. Show me. Let me fight for you this time. She stared at him, this man who was both a stranger and the love of her life, who didn't remember her but felt her in his bones. Tears blurred her vision. I loved you, she whispered, for so long. Even after everything. Even after I told myself I shouldn't. Something inside Evan broke softly, quietly, beautifully. He pulled her into his arms with a force that bordered on desperation, holding her, as if trying to merge the fragmented pieces of his memory with the truth of her body against his. Amani let herself collapse into him, burying her face against his chest, inhaling the scent that once meant safety, home warmth. He held her tighter, his voice trembling into her hair. Whatever happened, whatever he did, whatever I forgot, I'm here now, and I'm not letting you face this alone. She clutched the back of his shirt, sobbing into the fabric. I can't lose you again. He pressed his lips to her forehead, soft, steady, certain. You won't. And in that embrace, fierce, overwhelming, 8 years overdue, something inside them both finally clicked into place. The past they had lost, the future they feared, the love they never truly buried. All of it ignited in the space between their hearts, pulling them into the fire together. The underground laboratory of Blackwell Biotech looked nothing like the futuristic research hubs displayed in the company's glossy marketing brochures. This place, sealed beneath layers of steel and deception, felt more like a tomb than a scientific facility. Cold, fluorescent lights flickered along narrow corridors, humming with an almost predatory rhythm. The air was heavy with something sterile, yet suffocating, like the walls themselves were holding their breath, anticipating the violence about to erupt. Amani felt her pulse pounding in her throat as she followed Evan through the hidden elevator. Richard's encrypted key had activated. Each floor they descended tightened the coil of dread in her chest. Nathan had been left under federal protection, but she had made him a promise. She prayed she wouldn't break. I will come back. Evan's hand remained locked around hers, the entire descent steady and warm, despite the storm raging inside him. The closer they got, the more his mind began to spark with broken memories. Flashes of Amani's laughter, her hands in his hair, her soft murmur of Vince whispered into his neck. He didn't understand the fragments, but his body did, urging him forward, urging him to become the man she needed. When the elevator slid open, darkness swallowed them. Only a single corridor stretched ahead, illuminated by emergency lights blinking a faint red. Somewhere beyond, muffled sounds, fearful gasps, a child's suppressed sob echoed down the hall. Amani froze. Theo, she whispered, barely breathing. Evan gently squeezed her hand, his jaw tightening. We'll get him, he said, voice low with unshakable resolve. We'll get them both. They moved forward cautiously, hearts beating with equal parts terror and determination. At the end of the corridor, the door to the chamber lay open, a chilling glow leaking into the hallway. Richard Blackwell stood inside, his expression twisted with the kind of cold ambition that had cost him every shred of humanity. In one hand, he held a syringe filled with an iridescent serum that seemed to shimmer unnaturally under the lights. With the other hand, he gripped Theo's arm, forcing the boy onto a metal chair bolted to the floor. Theo's face was streaked with tears, his small chest rising and falling in frantic breaths. "Grandfather, please stop," Theo whimpered, voice trembling. "Dad will come." "Your father has already chosen incorrectly," Richard hissed, tightening his grip. "You are leverage, nothing more. The girl will cooperate once she sees what disobedience costs." Amani stepped into view, her voice cracking with horror. "Stop! Richard! Stop! He's just a child!" Richard turned his head, and a cold, satisfied smile pulled at his lips. "Ah, there she is." Evan pushed forward, pure fury burning in his eyes. "Get away from him." Richard arched a brow, undisturbed. "Evan, you arrived faster than expected, but I suppose paternal instinct can be motivating. You're not touching my son," Evan growled, his voice dripping with venom. "Or Amani." Son Richard let out a dark laugh. "You still think you have a claim to these decisions? You're naive. Both children belong to the Blackwell line, and without this formula, our empire will collapse. He jerked his head toward Amani, "will finish what her mother started. And you will step aside." Amani's stomach twisted. "My mother, alive for now," Richard said with a shrug. "As long as she remains useful." Tears burned at the corners of Amani's eyes, but she stood tall. "Let Theo go. I'll cooperate. I'll do the work. Just don't hurt him." Evan turned to her, sharply, pain slicing his expression. "Amani, no. Don't you dare." "What choice do I have?" she whispered, her voice trembling. "He'll kill him." But before she could take a step toward Richard, everything spiraled into chaos. Richard yanked Theo back, raising the syringe. "Enough. She will do as I say, but not before she understands her leverage." Time slowed. Amani's scream ripped through the air, pure, primal, desperate. "Theo." Evan moved before thought even formed. His body reacted with a memory deeper than consciousness, deeper than time, deeper than the lies his father fed him for 8 years. The man he once was, the man Amani loved, burst through the surface like a tidal wave. He lunged forward, shoving Theo out of the syringe's path. The needle plunged into Evan's shoulder. Amani's scream tore from her throat, raw and devastating. "Evan!" Theo collapsed onto the floor, eyes wide with terror, as he watched Evan stiffen the serum, burning instantly into his bloodstream. Evan staggered, breathing ragged blood blooming across his shirt where the needle had pierced. Richard let out a furious snarl. "You fool, do you have any idea?" But Evan didn't hear him. His only focus was on Theo, who scrambled backwards, sobbing uncontrollably. Evan crouched in front of him despite the shaking in his limbs. "It's okay," he whispered, voice strained but gentle. "You're safe. I've got you." Then his strength gave out. He fell backward, catching himself against the floor, gasping as the tainted serum coursed like fire through his veins. Amani rushed to him, tears streaking her face, falling to her knees beside him. "No, no, no! Evan, look at me! Please!" His hand found hers, fingers trembling, gripping her as if she were the only thing tethering him to life. "Amani," he whispered, breath shallow. "I remember." Her heart stopped. What Evan's gaze softened, pain fading beneath something brighter, something hauntingly tender. "Your face." His fingers brushed her cheek weakly. "The night we met. The way you laughed. The way you said my name." A sob tore from her chest. He lifted his hand to her jaw, unsteady, shaking, but full of love. "You were always The one. She cupped his face with both hands, her tears falling onto his skin. Don't say goodbye. Don't you dare. I'm not. He whispered, his voice barely audible. I'm just remembering. Rage and grief collided in her chest, her hands trembling as she held his face. Evan, please stay with me. Stay with us. Don't leave me again. Please, I love you. He breathed, closing his eyes for a moment, as if savoring the truth. Even when I didn't know you, I felt you. Her sobs shook her body. She pressed her forehead against his, her tears mixing with the sweat on his skin. We're not losing you. Not again. Behind them, Richard reached for another syringe, this one filled with a backup vial. But before he could take another step, the laboratory doors exploded inward. Federal agents flooded the room with weapons drawn, shouting orders, subduing Richard's guards instantly. Richard tried to grab his son, perhaps to use him as a shield, but the agents tackled him to the ground. His roar of outrage echoed off the steel walls. Evan's eyes remained on Amani, even as the world erupted around them. Your mother, he murmured faintly. They're bringing her. She's safe. Amani turned, just as two agents escorted a frail woman into the room, her mother trembling, exhausted but alive. The sight sent Amani's knees buckling. But she couldn't go to her. Not yet. Evan was fading. Stay with me, she whispered, kissing his forehead with trembling lips. Please, stay. His eyes fluttered, the serum overtaking him, turning his breath shallow. Amani, he whispered, don't be afraid. She clutched him as agents carefully lifted him onto a stretcher. Blood dripped down her arms from his shoulder wound, warm and terrifying. I love you, she whispered desperately. I love you, so stay alive. Fight. Fight for us. His eyes opened one final time, blue and full of devotion. She thought she'd lost forever. Always, he breathed. Then consciousness slipped from him. Amani cried out, reaching for him as the paramedics rushed him down the corridor toward the elevator. Her mother held her from behind, arms trembling but warm. Go with him, she whispered. He came back for you. Go. Amani nodded through her sobs and sprinted after the stretcher, her heart breaking, her soul clawing for the man who had finally remembered her, only to be ripped from her arms again. The hospital room was dim-lit only by the steady glow of the monitors and the soft wash of afternoon sun filtering through half-closed blinds. The world outside moved on, cars rushing, lives unfolding, but inside everything felt suspended, waiting for a single heartbeat, a single breath, a single moment, when the man lying unconscious on the bed would open his eyes. Amani had fallen asleep in the chair beside him, exhaustion pulling her under after hours of pacing, praying, whispering promises into the sterile air. Her hands were still clasped around Evan's, her head resting on the edge of the mattress, her curls cascading over his arm like a blanket she refused to lift. She hadn't let go of him once. Not after the surgery. Not after the doctors warned her the serum might leave permanent damage. Not even when her mother insisted she rest. She stayed. Because 8 years ago she lost him without warning, lost him without goodbye, and she would not survive losing him again. The door cracked open softly. Nathan and Theo slipped inside, both boys quiet, anxious, moving on tiptoe, as if afraid the slightest noise would shatter something fragile. They climbed onto the opposite side of the bed, their small hands reaching to touch Evan's uninjured arm, their matching faces shadowed with fear. Is Dad going to wake up? Theo whispered, his voice trembling. Amani lifted her head slowly, her eyes red but steady. She stroked Theo's cheek gently. He will, she said, even though uncertainty twisted painfully in her chest. Your father is stronger than anyone I've ever known. Nathan pressed his forehead against Evan's arm. Please wake up, he whispered. We need you. The room sank into silence, heavy, yearning, raw. Then Evan's fingers twitched. Just barely, but enough. Amani gasped softly, her breath catching her entire body, freezing in anticipation. The boy's stiffened eyes widening. Another twitch. Then a slow inhale deeper than the shallow breaths he'd been taking before. Evan's eyelids fluttered, fighting the fog, like a man clawing his way out of darkness. Amani leaned closer, tears gathering her lips, trembling. Evan, she whispered. Baby. Can you hear me? His brow furrowed slightly, as if recognizing the sound of her voice before the meaning of the words. His throat moved with effort. Then finally, slowly, his eyes opened. And the moment he saw her, the world snapped back into place. Not with confusion, not with emptiness, with clarity so sharp it stole Amani's breath. His gaze softened instantly, overflowing with a tenderness she hadn't seen in 8 long years. A tenderness he used to reserve only for her. His voice came out hoarse, fragile, but filled with unmistakable recognition. Amani! Her heart cracked open. Tears spilled freely down her cheeks. She cupped his face with both hands, as if afraid he might disappear if she blinked. I'm here, she cried softly. I'm right here. Evan swallowed weakly. Angel. Her breath hitched on a sob. She hadn't heard that word in so long, not since the nights he held her in the small apartment above the bodega, whispering my angel into her neck, as if she were the peace he never deserved. Hearing it now broken, reverent, felt like a miracle. Angel of mine, he whispered again, a faint smile lifting the corner of his mouth despite the pain. I remember everything. Amani let out a strangled laugh, half cry, half prayer. She bent forward, resting her forehead against his, her tears dripping onto his skin like pieces of the past falling back into place. Evan, oh God, she breathed. I thought I'd lost you forever. Never, he murmured, his voice growing steadier with every word. Never again. Nathan couldn't hold back anymore. He threw himself onto the bed, hugging Evan with trembling arms. Dad. Evan winced, but wrapped an arm around his son, his chest tightening with emotion. Nathan, he whispered, pressing a kiss to the boy's hair, as if instinct carried him past the years he'd lost. My boy. Theo joined in next, climbing closer, tears spilling, as he buried his face into Evan's shoulder. Dad, I was so scared. Evan held both boys clumsily with his limited strength, but there was so much love in the gesture Amani felt it like a physical force in the room. His voice cracked as he whispered, My sons, my beautiful boys, I should have been there. I should have protected you both. I'm so sorry. Nathan tightened his hold. You're here now. That's what matters. Theo nodded fiercely. We're a family. We found each other. Evan looked up at Amani, meeting her eyes with a gravity that sent a shiver through her. A family, he repeated softly. Because of you. She shook her head, tears shining like diamonds. No, because of all of us. Because they never stopped feeling each other. Because you never stopped feeling me. Evan's right hand, still trembling, reached for hers. She placed her palm against his fingers, threading like they had never forgotten the way. What my father did. Evan's voice darkened, pain and rage weaving through it. What he stole from us. It won't define us anymore. I swear to you, Amani, I will spend the rest of my life undoing the damage he caused. She leaned down, kissing his forehead gently. her voice breaking with love. The only thing I want is you alive. With me. With them. The boys huddled closer, wrapping the four of them together in a messy, emotional embrace. Limbs tangled, tears mingling, hearts beating in shared relief. For the first time in 8 years, there was no missing piece. No silence. No void. Just a family complete. Evan rested his head back on the pillow, exhausted but alive, his gaze drifting from Amani to their sons and back. Angel, he whispered one last time, voice softening into contentment. I'm home. And as Amani kissed the corner of his mouth, light tender filled with every year of love she'd buried, a peaceful trembling smile curved his lips. After 8 years of being broken, the Blackwell family was whole again. A month after the rescue, after Richard's arrest, after the world learned about the illegal experiments hidden beneath the glittering empire of Blackwell Biotech, New York, felt strangely gentle, as if the city itself had decided to exhale. The spring wind carried a softness rarely seen in Manhattan, brushing against the gleaming glass of Blackwell Tower, as though the skyscraper needed comfort too. It was on this tower, on the rooftop terrace of the tallest building in the city, that Evan stood waiting, one hand resting on the railing, the other lost in his pocket, as if steadying the storm inside him. The city stretched beneath him like a sea of lights, shimmering reflections rippling across the Hudson, neon flickers, dancing between the concrete canyons. It felt like standing at the heart of the universe, vast, fragile, endlessly alive. But he wasn't nervous about the height. He wasn't nervous about the future that lay in front of them. The only thing that made his pulse race was the woman he was waiting for. Amani Johnson. His love. His past. His present. His everything was somewhere behind him, making her way up the final staircase with her mother and the boys. And he felt her before he heard her. Her presence moved through the air like a familiar melody, warm and steady, reaching into the deepest parts of him. When he turned, he forgot how to breathe. Amani stepped into the rooftop light, wearing a simple white dress, the fabric catching the breeze in soft, flowing waves. Her curls framed her face in a halo of inky softness, her skin glowing under the golden hue of the city lights. She looked like hope, sculpted into human form, like forgiveness, like every dream he had ever lost and finally found again. For a moment he just stared, unable to move, unable to speak. It was strange how a month of healing after 8 years of separation, betrayal, and pain could still feel like only the beginning of their story. Amani's eyes softened as she approached. "You look like you're about to pass out," she teased breathlessly, but her own hands trembled slightly at her sides. Evan laughed under his breath, the sound shaky. "I might," he admitted, his voice low. "You have that effect on me." She stepped closer, the wind tugging gently at her dress. "Evan, you asked me to come up here. What's going on?" Her tone was curious light, but there was a subtle quiver beneath it, an awareness, a waiting. He swallowed. His heart thudded once hard, certain, and then he went down on one knee. A gasp left her lips, soft and fragile as starlight. For a heartbeat, the world stilled. Even the wind seemed to quiet, bowing to the moment. Evan reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. His hands shook not with fear, but with the overwhelming weight of everything they had survived to reach this point. "Amani Johnson." He began, his voice raw with emotion. "The woman who saved me before I even understood I was broken. The woman who taught me what love should feel like, long before I ever deserved it." Her eyes filled, instantly, shimmer gathering in them like dew. "Evan," she whispered, but her voice failed as her breath hitched. He steadied himself, lifting his chin to meet her gaze fully. You loved me even when the world told you not to. You carried our son alone. You survived the darkness my family created. And even after I forgot everything, forgot us, you were still the one my soul kept trying to find. Tears slid down her cheeks silently. He reached for her hand, holding it gently but firmly, grounding them both. You gave me 2 sons. You gave me a second chance at a life I didn't deserve. You gave me yourself. His voice cracked. And I want to spend the rest of my life earning you. He opened the small box, revealing a ring far simpler than the world expected from a Blackwell, but perfect for her. A smooth band of platinum cupped a single oval diamond, clear and bright, surrounded by a halo of smaller stones that caught the city lights like tiny constellations. Amani Johnson. He said, his voice dropping to a breathless whisper. Will you marry me? Not as a Blackwell, not under shadows or lies, but as the man who loves you beyond anything I can explain, and as the father of our beautiful family. Amani pressed a trembling hand to her mouth, her shoulders shaking as tears streamed freely down her face. For a second she couldn't speak. Her knees buckled slightly. All she could see was the boy she once loved under his false name Vince, the boy who kissed her beneath street lamps, who whispered secrets into her ear like confessions. And now here he was, a man kneeling before her, with a heart stripped bare, offering her not just a ring, but the promise he failed to give her 8 years ago. She sank to her knees in front of him, cupping his face in both hands, her forehead resting against his. Her voice broke on a whisper. I've waited 8 years to hear you ask me this. Evan's breath shuddered, his eyes burning with emotion. And then, before either of them could speak again, 2 voices shrieked from behind them. Hon hon die kiss now. Nathan and Theo burst forward, jumping up and down, completely oblivious to the quiet sacredness of the moment. Amani giggled through her tears, turning toward them. Boys. But Evan didn't wait. He wrapped an arm around her waist, lifting her effortlessly off the ground, spinning her once under the wide, glittering New York sky. Her laughter broke free, pure, bright, alive, filling the rooftop with the sound of home. And then he kissed her. Not a gentle kiss, not a cautious one, but a deep, full, aching kiss that carried the weight of 8 stolen years and the promise of all the years yet to come. A kiss that rewrote every wound, every scar, every memory. A kiss that finally returned them to the life that had been denied. Amani's arms wound around his neck, her fingers sliding into his hair. Evan held her with a tenderness so fierce, she felt it all the way to her bones. When they finally broke apart, breathless and dizzy, he pressed his forehead to hers, smiling in that crooked, boyish way that once made her heart stumble. My angel, he murmured. My wife. Her tears glittered like diamonds under the city lights. My love, she whispered. My home. The boys barreled into them then, Theo hugging his father's waist, Nathan hugging Amani's side, until the 4 of them were tangled together in a chaotic, joyous heap on the rooftop, laughing, crying, clinging. For the first time in 8 years, there were no secrets, no lies, no fear dragging at their heels, just love, just family, just the soft promise of a future finally free from shadows. Evan wrapped an arm around each boy, pulling them close, and reached for Amani's hand with his free one, linking their fingers tightly. Below them, New York shone with a million lights, bright and endless. Above them, the night sky stretched wide and clean, as if blessing the moment. And between them, in the quiet glow of the rooftop, happiness settled softly, full, real, and complete. Central Park had never looked more magical. Golden afternoon sunlight filtered through the canopy of green, casting warm, dappled patterns over the small clearing Evan and Amani had chosen, not because it was luxurious or extravagant, but because it was where she once told him dreams felt possible. Now, standing beneath an arch covered in ivory roses and soft white peonies, Amani felt as if her entire life had led her to this single breath, this single heartbeat. The orchestra in the distance played a gentle romantic melody, the kind that wrapped around a person like silk. Friends, colleagues, doctors, federal agents who had become unexpected allies, all gathered quietly watching with soft smiles. But Amani saw only one person. Evan waited at the altar in a tailored black suit, simple and elegant, his hair slightly tousled by the breeze. When he looked at her approaching, there was nothing but wonder in his eyes, raw, reverent, tender, like he was watching a miracle take human shape. Nathan and Theo walked proudly ahead of her, each carrying a ring box, like it was treasure, their identical smiles glowing with excitement. When they reached the altar, they turned to watch Amani with such obvious love that her chest tightened. Her mother, standing by her side with a bouquet of white lilies, gently squeezed her arm. "Go," she whispered with a smile. "Go to the life you deserve." And so Amani stepped forward, her white gown flowing around her like a whisper, her heart trembling in the most beautiful way. When she reached Evan, he took her hands with such care it nearly stole her breath. "Hi," he murmured softly, the same soft greeting he used to whisper late at night when he slid into bed beside her back, when they were just two students in love. Amani smiled, tears shimmering. "Hi." The officiant began speaking, but neither truly heard the words in full. They were lost in each other in the journey that had carved them into the people they were now. At some point, Evan lifted her hands to his lips, brushing a kiss across her knuckles. "I used to think fate was something people invented to feel better about loss," he whispered. "But then you came back, and everything made sense again." Amani blinked, tears spilling softly. "You came back to me first," she whispered. "You remembered me when it mattered most." Evan shook his head slightly. "My heart remembered you long before my mind did." A hush fell as the officiant nodded to Evan. "Your vows." Evan exhaled, voice thickening with emotion. "Amani, my angel, you saved me twice. Once, when we were young, and again when you walked back into my life with the strength of someone who had survived the impossible. I promise to protect our family with everything I am. I promise to choose you every day. I promise to love you without fear, without hesitation, without end." Amani's tears finally slipped free, her voice trembling when she answered. "Evan, for 8 years, I loved you in silence. For 8 years, I carried our son alone, believing fate had taken you from me. But you came back, not as the man you once were, but as the man I always knew you could be. I promise to walk beside you through every joy, every fight, every tomorrow. I promise to love you as fearlessly as I did the first time." Nathan and Theo both sniffled loudly, causing a ripple of laughter through the guests. Evan took the rings from their trembling hands, sliding one onto Amani's finger with a whisper of devotion in his eyes. She placed the second on his hand, their fingers brushing electricity dancing between them. "I now pronounce you husband and wife." Evan didn't wait. He pulled Amani into his arms and kissed her, as if sealing 8 years of missing pieces into place. Nathan and Theo cheered louder than anyone. And beneath the soft glow of the New York sun, surrounded by love and rebirth, Evan and Amani Blackwell finally stepped into the life they were always meant to have together. Forever. The end.